2 hours before dawn, Central Field, Iwo Jima, 7th of April, 1945. Volcanic grit skirls in the floodlights as a crew chief threads safety wire through the bolt of a 110-gallon drop tank under Lieutenant Jim van der Hay's P-51D. The island smells like hot iron and rotten eggs. Steam breathes from seams in the cinders. He checks the Merlin by touch as much as sight. Magnetos, primer, a thumb on the safety cover for the fuel shutoff, because on very long range there is no margin. He murmurs the gospel he learned in the ready tent. 2,000 RPM, 29 to 30 inches manifold, mixture lean of rich until the gauge stops twitching. Fuel is a clock you wear inside your chest. A corporal drags a hose, black with ash. They talk like men beating back sleep. Someone mentions the banzai from the caves 12 nights ago, how armourers fired carbines from behind fuel drums, how pilots pulled perimeter while tracers stitched the bivouac. The runway still wears the memory, patched seams pale in the lamplight. Van der Hay signs the Form 1A, then folds a letter he wrote before the brief and tucks it behind his kneeboard. If he doesn't bring it home, the chaplain will. He climbs the ladder, metal cold through his glove. 6.50 cal Brownings wait in the wings with 1,880 rounds he will try not to waste. He runs his finger along the cowl fasteners and whispers a farm prayer that somehow mentions carburetors. The starter whines. The Packard-built V1650-7 coughs once, then smooths into a polished growl. On the far side of the line, another Mustang lights, and the prop arcs like a buzzsaw in moonlight. Crew chiefs step back, silhouettes in dust. The tower lamp blinks a patient green. He taxis through ghost eddies of ash and checks the compass swing. The brief sits in his ears. 7th Fighter Command, 15th and 21st Groups up first, rendezvous off Honshu, bombers to Musashino. Weather over the target is reported clear, a phrase that means both precision and danger. He rehearses the long overwater legs in his mind. Departure fixes, radio beacons, the invisible lifeline of air-sea rescue, PBY Dumbo call signs and destroyer boxes, a promise that if the numbers fail, men in other uniforms will try to catch him. At the hold short, he cages the gyro, snaps the chin strap, and glances at Mount Suribachi's black tooth against a paling east. He thumbs the drop tank switch to make sure it moves. He thinks of gasoline as a material more precious than courage. When the lamp goes bright, he pushes the throttle, feels the airframe lift through its own grit, and aims the nose toward a horizon that, by doctrine and logistics, is closer than it looks. He tells himself what every flyer on Iwo says before the ocean opens: range is fate, and discipline is mercy. Dawn in western Tokyo comes clean and cool, the sort of morning that sharpens edges and tricks the eye into thinking distance is safe. Sato Haruko, 17, ties her kerchief and joins the thin file at the gate of Nakajima's Musashino complex, where the buildings are so big they seem to make their own weather. The whistle's first cry sifts across rows of corrugated roofs. She can smell solvent already, that sweet astringent that clings to hair even after 2 scrubbings. A civil defence warden checks her badge and her tin whistle and sends her inside, where the floor is bright with chalk lines that say where to stand when the siren learns your name. Inside, the floor chief counts rivets and minutes like currency. The schedule is a grid drawn by men who do not sweat here. Valve covers, accessory housings, crates of fasteners that used to arrive by rail and now arrive late or not at all. Haruko's station sits beneath a skylight panel painted black on the outside, dim on the inside. She takes the pneumatic gun from its hook and tests the trigger. The hose breathes like a sleeping animal. The foreman announces inspections. A bell rings. The line lurches into the day's slow sprint. They have been told a story about the sky. B-29s are giants, yes, but predictable. Long warning, long rumble, long shadows, like storms sliding in from the sea. The instructors insist American fighters cannot reach Tokyo. The sea is too wide, the fuel too dear, the islands too few. Some days the sky cooperates and the story feels true. Today the sky is the kind of blue that lets you see the thought you are trying not to have. Haruko's friend Tomiko leans close and whispers that her brother, flying army fighters, says octane is so poor they warm engines like teapots. A siren drills down through the roof. The floor chief claps twice, a habit older than the war, and men and women start the practiced shuffle to shelters, to stairwells, to the space beneath steel tables where, by rule, you cover your neck and look at your knees. Haruko does not move yet. She is on the roof team this week, the stairs that go up instead of down. The door sticks. When it opens, the morning hits her like a clean blade. Somewhere beyond the western haze a glint moves, then another, too bright to be train smoke or river. She raises the little scope, breath held without meaning to. Far out, a moving geometry begins to resolve into a city of silver points. She feels the old fear and the new curiosity twined together. If the giants are coming, where are the warnings? Her warden barks for her to call it in, and she does, voice steady, posture correct. Then a smaller streak swings along the flank of the shining city, fast and level, and another follows with impossible poise, and she understands without words that the story about distance is about to be rewritten. Mid-morning over the Pacific, the air is so clear it looks polished. Captain Art Bridge slides his B-29 into the assembly stream, throttles matched so the props make one steady braid of sound. Sun strikes the upper surfaces until the bombers look like moving glaciers. He can feel the size of it in his hands. Hundreds of tons of aluminum, gasoline, and decision arranged in ordered lanes. His engineer calls manifold pressures, his navigator taps the drift meter and says the currents are kind. On the interphone, the crew sounds older than they are. They pick up the first escort calls like chimes hung in the wind. Little brothers inbound from Iwo on time. Bridge glances left to where a pair of specks, high and lean, are cutting a watchful arc. He knows what it took to put them there. Drop tanks that extend range beyond prudence, Packard Merlins run at parsimonious settings, 7 fighter command tactics that trade ego for endurance. He says nothing on the interphone except steady, because the calm of a bombardier's hand often begins in the tone of a pilot's voice. The stream grows. Box joins box until the formation feels less like an act of aggression than an act of administration, a travelling jurisdiction of altitude and aim points. He thinks of the men under him counting on geometry, rivet teams, line chiefs, the Seabees who paved a volcano into runways. His gunner reports contrails above and ahead, not ours. Bridge does the math without looking at the pad. Head-on passes likely, then slashing attacks from high 6. The Mustangs know it too, and he sees them slide outward into the places where trouble begins. Over the interphone, someone in the second box quotes a number they all learned but rarely say out loud. Last year, the United States built nearly 100,000 airplanes, more than Japan produced in the entire war. The statistic hangs in the cockpit like a third sun, impossible and cold. Bridge doesn't need to preach it. The proof is in the moving city, in the certainty that when a man throws a good tank away to save a better chance, another tank will be bolted under a new wing tomorrow. He checks the time to the initial point and finds there is room in the schedule for belief. They reach the final turn point. The navigator calls the initial point, the bombardier adjusts his sight, and the words "Bridge knows better than any hymn" come out clean. Bomb bay doors open. Far ahead, the land hardens to a line, and beyond that, a single white triangle rises from Honshu, the mountain that means you are almost out of luck and almost home at the same time. In the corner of his left window, a pair of fighters cut a perfect, patient curve that says everything's going to happen exactly on time. Bridge slides his thumb along the throttles until they sing in unison, and the city of airplanes goes to work. Honshu climbs out of the haze like a promise somebody else made. Mount Fujiyama cuts the sky so clean that even the radio seems to speak in sharper consonants. Vande. Hay leads his element into their altitude block above the stream, eyes tracing the glint-to-shadow rhythm that means the B-29s are steady on the line. Fuel first, always fuel. He notes the burn against time and weather, feels the weight of the 110-gallon tank under his left wing as a kind of itch. The report said visibility over Musashino would be excellent. Excellent is a word that can kill you. A pair of dots begin as rumours and become aircraft that carry intent, high, left to right. He calls it and hears his wingman acknowledge with a voice a shade too bright. He tells him to breathe and to keep the sun on his shoulder. The Mustangs ease their turn rate to gain a sliver of altitude, and Van der Hey toggles the drop tank switch. The empty hangs for a moment like a coin deciding its future, and then falls away, a deliberate luxury. The Merlin feels lighter in his bones. They are not chasing glory. They are buying geometry with gasoline. Below, the stream steadies into the disciplined boredom of the run-in. Bridges' box holds speed within a handful of knots. Bomb doors crack, then gape. The sight begins its slow arithmetic. An unseen controller on the Japanese side calls headings in clipped syllables. The first raider drops out of the higher cloud and charges, a knife against a train. Van der Hey waits, then rolls, showing only the belly long enough to make the enemy commit. The pass is a trade, closure, angle, a heartbeat, and he squeezes a 3 count, nothing more. He feels more than hears the 6 guns talk, short, civilized bursts that know exactly how much lead costs and exactly what it buys. Tracers sow heat through cold air. The raider flashes past, intact, furious. The wingman holds position better now, chastened by speed. They climb back to their bracket, careful not to be pulled into a turning fight that would feed time to the enemy's advantage. Van der Hey calls a check and hears the right names in the right order, which is as much peace as a man gets this far from land. When he glances down, he can see rectangles resolving into buildings, rail spines and smoke lanes that a rhythmic wind pushes like a curtain. He thinks of the ash on Iwo, of the letter behind his board, of the crew chief's grease-dark hands sending him into the morning. The radio clicks. Initial point. It's almost tender, the way the voice says it. He eases the throttle a hair to keep station with a bomber he will never meet on the ground, and all at once the sky over Tokyo feels smaller than doctrine ever admitted. At Atsugi, the morning smells of cold metal and thin gasoline. Lieutenant Commander Mori Takao trots across concrete patched so often it looks like a game board, helmet chin strap slapping his neck. His J-2M Raiden waits with its mouth open, 4 20mm cannon hunched like clenched teeth. A crew chief gives him a look that compresses the state of the Empire into one exhausted nod. The controller's voice snaps from the revetment radio. B-29's inbound Musashino, Angels 25-30, approach from the west, speed steady. He answers with his call sign and hears his wingman's younger voice echo it back. He has learned to treat fuel like breath. Never expend more than you can replace in time. The heat of combat power will eat pistons if the gasoline is poor, and the gasoline is always poor. He runs the checklist with the boy on his wing. Harness locked, canopy latched, flaps set for a field that no longer feels long enough. Armourers move along the line with belts of shells, counting out loud to make 2 aircraft into 4 halves of adequacy. The crew chief wipes his hands on a rag polished to transparency and slaps the fuselage twice, the old permission. The takeoff is a study in reluctance. The Raiden does not leap, it decides. Gear thumps up and the nose hunts for a climb that will not punish the gauges. He chooses rate over hurry, patience over passion. The radio gives headings, then a phrase that sounds wrong in a mouth trained by the war so far. Enemy fighters with the bombers. He asks for confirmation and it comes from 2 different sectors. For a blink, he feels insult rather than fear. Fighters are the privilege of proximity. The ocean is supposed to make such privileges expensive. Yet the reports keep coming, calm and ordinary. as if impossibility were merely a change in schedule. He levels to build speed and thinks about doctrine. Head-on passes against the B-29s, then a dive and away to preserve energy, stay out of turning fights with American escorts, rumoured to be as implacable as they are fast. He trusts his instincts and the Raiden's climb, trusts his wingman to cover the blind crescent behind his shoulder. Over Tokyo Bay, the air hardens with a brittle fatigue he recognises from late stages of other things. Harvests, marriages, kingdoms. He checks ammunition, 4-cannon, and touches the mixture lever as if soothing an animal. Contrails appear first, a white harp. Then the shapes beneath the strings come clear. The great silver boxes, serene and terrible. Along their flanks, stiletto glints that do not belong. He knows immediately what those smaller shapes mean, not just for this morning, but for all possible mornings to come. The radio calls, "Commit." He pushes the throttle through its gate, feels the engine protest, and points the Raiden at the future, which looks for the moment like a single bright speck with a pilot inside who does not yet know his name. The target resolves the way a negative resolves in a tray, rectangles waking into roofs, rail spines bright as fishbones. Bridge steadies the stream on the run-in, left hand opening the bomb bay valves, right hand gentle on the throttles so the formation breathes together. The bombardier calls corrections in a voice that never rises. Wind is quartering from the east. The drift is small but real. Out of the corner of his eye, he sees the escorts mark time along the perimeter like sheepdogs with wings. On the factory's roof, Haruko's world narrows to lines and angles. The civil defense whistle has already done its work, but she is on roster for the roof walk, counting columns of smoke and calling bearings. She has been told the story all her life, that the giants come alone. Now something smaller and sharper hunts along the flanks of the giants, and the sound they make is different, a saw that cuts the day into clean pieces. Mori meets the stream head-on because that is what the book says. The sight picture is there and gone, a cathedral window collapsing into shards. He squeezes, then kicks rudder and dives, not waiting to learn whether the tracers found aluminum or sky. 2 Mustangs slide into his wake, and he throws the Raiden down the long stairwell of the dive, engine howling its complaint in a register he has learned means go lower or pay later. He thinks he has stolen a second when the air thumps with a burst that cuts behind his canopy. Vande, Hay holds discipline like a talisman, short bursts only, no waste. Guard the box on the run-in and again on the withdrawal. Do not let speed talk you out of station. He sees the raider flash and resists the old hunger to follow. The bombardier calls, "On time," and the sight releases. The pattern walks across Musashino, disciplined as rain. Below, machine tools jump on their mounts and shelves slide. Bridge feels the ship grow lighter and steadier at once. The stream keeps its shape because hands far from this sky held a standard. Far away, where the sea looks like hammered tin, a destroyer turns to a new course on the say-so of a single broken transmission from a damaged Mustang. The net is already stretching to meet a man who might be in the water before he knows he is falling. It will happen again and again. The system is designed to save as fiercely as it strikes. By war's end, 2,251 B-29s will land on Iwo's runways in extremis, and approximately 24,761 airmen will step onto cinder instead of into the sea, an impossible arithmetic made ordinary by organisation. Above the target, the last bombs step off the racks and the bay doors begin to close, and in the clean light over Tokyo, the sky feels suddenly smaller and more owned than it has ever felt before. The sky over Tokyo twists into a lattice of contrails and gun smoke, and Van der Hey feels the P-51 shiver as he dives to meet a jack that has overshot the bomber stream. His thumb jabs the radio trigger, short burst, brake left, and the wingman slides clear with a discipline that has taken months of training and thousands of gallons of precious fuel. Below, the city is a patchwork of roof lines and burning rafters. He banks, and the sun flashes off the polished aluminum like a mirror held to the world. The long overwater climb and the careful fuel calculations are behind him now. The fight is here, and it is sudden. Bridge, in his B-29 cockpit, watches the Mustangs wheel across the formation like herding dogs, their silver bellies catching the morning glare. He can hear their chatter on the escort frequency, crisp and calm even as tracer rounds scratch the air. It is a sound that makes the bomber crews breathe easier, a promise that these giants are not alone. He notes that one of the P-51s has just jettisoned a perfectly good drop tank in order to gain a fraction more climb rate, waste to a Japanese pilot, but doctrine to an American. Maury feels the limits of his Raiden with every pull of the stick. His engine groans as he forces the climb, fuel gauge already flirting with red. The Americans throw away what he cannot replace. Fuel tanks, ammunition, even entire airplanes if need be, confident that Detroit will send more. He knows his own nation can barely build a few hundred planes a month, while American factories produced nearly 100,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. That statistic, though never spoken in his cockpit, rides the wind like a second enemy. The Mustang's 6.50 caliber guns speak in short bursts, each round a streak of molten light. Maury rolls hard and dives, trying to escape the relentless geometry of the escorts. The Americans are not just pilots. They are a system, a choreography of industry and tactics. He pulls away, alive, but already understanding that no personal valor can match this machinery of war. Far below, Haruko feels the factory tremble as bombs fall in a pattern too neat to be chance. She clutches the stairwell rail, the sharp smell of burning oil mixing with solvent in her lungs. When she finally dares to look skyward, she sees the smaller glints darting along the bomber stream and knows that the story she was taught, that fighters could never cross the ocean, has been shattered in a single morning. Above, Van der Hey levels out, gauges steady, and scans for the next threat. Around him, the sky belongs to those who arrived from a horizon the enemy believed impassable. He feels the truth settle in his bones. American range has become a weapon all its own. A sudden crack, sharper than flak, cuts through the radio net. One of the Mustangs has taken a hit. Glycol fumes bloom inside the cockpit, sweet and lethal. The pilot calls out, voice tight, "Losing coolant, need escort." Van der Hey answers, without thinking, "On me." "Get on my wing, little brother." He banks gently toward the outbound course, his own fuel burn rising with each minute of slower speed. Bridge hears the exchange and adjusts his formation ever so slightly to keep the crippled fighter within the protective circle of bombers. His engineer calls out fuel states and manifold pressures, and the big superfortress seems to lean toward its wounded guardian. The B-29 crews know the plan. Air-sea rescue is already spinning up. PBY Dumbo flying boats and destroyer picket ships wait along the return path, each with lifeboats and die markers ready. The net is invisible but real, a lattice of men and machines designed to save as fiercely as they strike. Far below, Haruko helps an older co-worker stumble through smoke and falling dust. The air tastes of burned rubber and hot metal. Sirens wail against the echo of departing engines. She has seen bombing before, but never this, fighters darting like hawks alongside the bombers, daring anyone to contest their passage. For the first time, she feels that the sea around Japan is not a moat, but a hallway. Maury breaks away from the fight, fuel almost gone. His wingman's voice is thin with frustration. There is no shame left in disengagement, only the arithmetic of survival. He knows there will be no rescue if he is forced into the water. The Imperial Navy has no fleet of flying boats waiting, no destroyers patrolling the emptiness for downed pilots. His own nation's scarcity is written in the empty horizon. Van der Hey checks his gauges again, calculating whether he can stay with the wounded Mustang all the way back to Iwo. He thinks of the Seabees who turned volcanic rock into 3 runways and of the 2,251 B-29s that by war's end will find salvation there. Nearly 25,000 airmen spared the sea. The statistic is impossible and yet already true in spirit. America has built a safety net the enemy cannot even imagine. As the Japanese coast falls behind them, the sun lowers to the west. The crippled Mustang holds station, its coolant steam trailing like a banner of stubborn hope. Van der Hey keeps his wings steady, the ocean yawning beneath them, and knows that the same industrial abundance that put fighters over Tokyo will also bring this pilot home. By late afternoon, the fight has thinned to silence. The Pacific stretches below like hammered tin, broken only by the slow scars of shipwakes. Van der Hey eases the throttle back, listening to the soft, even growl of the Merlin. 7 hours in the air has turned the cockpit into a second skin. Oil smell, sweat, and the faint metallic taste of oxygen from the mask. Bridge reviews the mission on his clipboard. Bomb pattern accurate, Musashino plant struck hard, bomber losses acceptable, 7 B-29s, mostly to flak and aerial bombs. He writes without flourish, aware that the real meaning lies beyond the numbers. The Mustangs have made it back. The unescorted era is over. Mori lands at Atsugi on a fuel gauge so low the needle quivers at empty. He taxis past revetments where ground crews count bullet holes and trade rumours of impossible enemies. He knows the Americans will return tomorrow and the next day, and that the appearance of fighters over Tokyo is not an anomaly, but a beginning. The realization sits heavier than defeat in a single dogfight. Haruko emerges from the factory shelter into a courtyard speckled with bomb fragments. A crane leans at an odd angle. Windows gape where glass once caught the morning sun. She picks her way through the debris with the slow caution of someone whose world has shifted. The elders whisper that the Americans must have discovered a hidden airfield close by. She says nothing. She has seen the sea. She knows how far it is. Van der Hey listens as the escort frequency fills with the low hum of pilots checking fuel, counting their blessings, teasing each other in clipped Midwestern vowels. He thinks of the statistic the bomber crews sometimes repeat with a kind of awe. In 1944, the United States built more aircraft than Japan produced in the entire war. It is a fact as vast and impersonal as the ocean beneath him, yet every Mustang in the sky is its living proof. As Iwo Jima's black tooth of rock rises on the horizon, he feels the relief of a man who has outflown his own fear. The mission is complete, but something larger has begun. The enemy has learned today that distance is no defense and that American industry can turn even the widest ocean into a narrow strait. The realization will echo long after the smoke at Musashino has drifted away. Night settles over Iwo Jima like a warm, gritty blanket. A destroyer slides into harbour with a rescued pilot wrapped in a steaming blanket, the ship's wake glowing white against the black water. On the airfield, medics lift another flyer from a Mustang whose engine died the instant wheels touched cinder. The island smells of salt, diesel, and the ever-present sulphur that seeps from the earth. Bridge radios a brief message of thanks to the Air-Sea Rescue Network. The men who plucked the downed pilot from the Pacific will never be in the history books, but they have written a different kind of victory, one measured in lives preserved rather than enemies destroyed. He thinks of the statistic already circulating among crews. By the end of the war, 2,251 B-29s will make emergency landings here, saving roughly 24,761 airmen. It is a number so large it defies imagination, yet it begins with nights like this, one pilot at a time. Van der Hey writes a letter to the widow of a friend lost in March's Banzai attack, and another to the crew chief who kept his Mustang flying today. He feels the weight of those letters as part of the same war that built the planes, mined the fuel, and manned the destroyers. The system that wages war is also the system that brings men home. Haruko, across the sea, shares a ration ball with a shaken co-worker while fires gutter in the dark. The air still tastes of soot and machine oil. She has no statistics to measure the day, only the knowledge that something irreversible has happened. The Americans can come and go as they please. Maury sits in the quiet of the squadron ready room, the smell of spent cordite still clinging to his clothes. He thinks of the invisible rescue fleet the Americans deploy without fanfare. His own nation cannot spare fuel for patrols, much less a web of lifeboats and flying boats. He understands, perhaps for the first time, that the war is not a contest of bravery, but of capacity. On Iwo, the rescued pilot sips hot coffee while a medic checks his pulse. The destroyer's guns rest in shadow, but the island hums with the low thunder of generators and the unspoken confidence of a nation that can wage war and mercy at the same time. The pilot looks west, toward the dark Pacific, and knows that tomorrow the sky will belong to them again. Weeks slide by, and the pattern repeats until it feels like doctrine carved in stone. VLR missions launch with the precision of a production line. Mustangs lifting in pre-dawn dark, B-29s forming silver corridors across the Pacific, escorts scissoring above the bomber stream. Each mission tightens the noose around Japan's shrinking air defences. Maury watches his squadron roster wither. Training hours are cut again, new pilots arrive with barely enough flight time to solo. Engines fail for want of parts, octane quality slips lower each month. The Raiden's once vaunted climb is now a fragile boast, dependent on gasoline that sputters like lamp oil. He knows that the Americans will keep coming because their factories feed the sky faster than Japan can empty it. Haruko's factory shifts from production to salvage. They dismantle what remains of the Musashino plant, carting twisted metal to makeshift depots. She hears of other cities burned by firebombing raids that kill tens of thousands in a single night. The rumour of women fighter pilots surfaces, a desperate spark of pride. She says nothing. She has seen the escorts with her own eyes and knows the truth. The sky is already lost. Van der Hey and Bridge settle into the rhythm of long missions. Their checklists become liturgy, their trust in the air-sea rescue net a quiet faith. Losses drop as escorts sharpen their tactics. American abundance turns repetition into inevitability. In 1944, the United States produced almost 100,000 aircraft, more than Japan built in the entire war, and still the lines in Detroit and Seattle hum. Each successful mission carries a weight beyond bombs dropped. It is proof that a democratic nation can outproduce and outplan a totalitarian empire. The war is being decided not just by courage, but by the ability to turn steel and gasoline into a strategy that cannot be matched. Maury touches the patched cowling of his Raiden and feels the thin metal flex. He understands now that no personal valour, no final banzai, can bridge the gap between scarcity and abundance. He thinks of the American pilots who can jettison a full fuel tank to gain an instant of tactical advantage, confident that another waits in a crate back home. That confidence is the true weapon. In the ready room, he listens to the night insects and knows the war's outcome has already been written. Not in the smoke over Musashino, but in the ledgers of American factories. Rumour travels faster than reason. By late summer, a headline reaches Iwo Jima. Japanese women fighter pilots shocked by Mustangs. Van der Hey reads it aloud and lets the absurdity hang in the humid air. He has seen every pilot who tried to stop him. All were men. Yet he thinks of the women below, workers like Haruko, who looked up and felt the sky change shape. Their shock is real, even if the story's details are not. Haruko folds laundry by the light of a single candle. The city still bears the scars of repeated raids. The factory is now a skeleton of girders. She remembers the first morning she saw the fighters among the bombers and knows that the moment marked the end of Japan's illusions. Distance no longer protects, and the old stories have turned to dust. Bridge reviews final sortie statistics before rotation home. He notes that 2,251 B-29s have landed on Iwo in emergency, saving roughly 24,761 airmen, numbers that would have seemed impossible when the island was first seized. He reflects that the same system that could produce nearly 100,000 aircraft in a single year could also plan to rescue the men who flew them. Maury stands beside his grounded Raiden as surrender rumours harden into certainty. He touches the scarred fuselage and feels the echo of a nation's ambition fading. He has fought bravely, but he knows now that bravery cannot outbuild a democracy that turns factories into arsenals and rescue fleets into routine. Van der Hey walks the black sand runway at dusk, props ticking in the distance. He thinks of the CBs who built this place, of the crew chiefs and rescue sailors, of the millions back home whose labour and taxes turned American industry into a weapon stronger than any army of tradition. He knows the victory is not his alone, but the sum of a nation's will. The headline about women fighter pilots will linger as a curiosity, but the real revelation is larger. A free people, armed with abundance and guided by resolve, have crossed an ocean and made it small. The Pacific, once a vast moat, has become a narrow strait of American design. When Van der Hey turns toward the setting sun, he carries the quiet certainty that this triumph of industry and courage has reshaped the modern world and proved that freedom, given the tools, can outfight any tyranny.